Well, hey there, class. Welcome to our first PowerPoint lecture of chapter 1 in our text. I hope you enjoy this. As sort of dense and not exciting as policy, I guess when I was in school, policy was sort of the class you wanted to avoid. I have really loved getting to know this text and just the foundations of social welfare policy bring with it a lot of really great topics and thoughts to discuss. And so I hope you'll enjoy this. I'm going to try to keep it pretty brief, take you through just sort of the main points of this first chapter, and it will bring out its own discussion questions and that sort of thing. So here we go. Well, how do I do this? There we go, chapter 1. So first thing you'll notice in this text is that this is a text for social workers. Now, myself, that's my training. I have a BSW and an MSSW. So when I think about the social work world, it's pretty synonymous to the human services world. So there obviously are some differences, but in as far as I'm concerned, it's why they would assign a text like this. There are a lot more social work resources, and it overlaps human services so much that you might be a little unfamiliar. Probably by now you're not unfamiliar with things like the social work code of ethics. But a cool thing about this resource is that we will start our chapters sort of referring to part of the code of ethics. This is not really to the policy point, but sort of sets a tone for us. Let me get into it. So in section 6 of the social work code of ethics, which is just sort of a code that all social workers live by, there's a concept that social workers should promote the general welfare of society. So social workers should be aware of the impact of the political arena on practice and should advocate for changes in policy and legislation to improve social conditions in order to meet the basic human needs and promote social justice. So basically, this is just saying, as detached as sometimes social welfare policy feels to day in, day out practice, it should not be forgotten by us human services workers. And it's our responsibility to be aware, to be engaged, because it does have such an impact. I'm the king of wanting to detach and just engage in the community or the people that I'm working with. But this text is a great reminder that we actually have a responsibility to know about policy. We're going to start with some definitions. Chapter 1 really lays the groundwork for the rest of the book. So we're going to break down even the term social welfare. So obviously social welfare, let's break it up into 2 words. First is social, and social just means sort of the opposite of individual. We are collective. When people get together, that there is sort of a nature of things. We form a society. So the collective nature of society, and then welfare is just the well-being or a state of balance, healthiness. So together they mean the well-being of society, collective well-being. Why should we study social welfare? This is probably not lost on you is probably a little bit preaching to the choir here, but the points made here in the text is that it's about us. That's something that we can forget. Sometimes we think of ourselves as like the practitioners and sort of separate, but we'll learn in this chapter that we all in the collective in our country, we all are actually recipients, as well as a lot of us are providers. So we are both, and we'll find out more about that later. We should study social welfare to understand the systems that are in place. These systems can really affect us and affect the people that we love. As citizens, we are policymakers. The text makes this point that to be disengaged from policy is to play a role in policy. You can't avoid it. If you're disengaged, it's sort of like voting. To not vote is to cast a vote of sorts. And finally, to understand the influence that values and beliefs have on social welfare policies and systems. That's another neat concept that comes out in this text, is that at the bottom of all of the morass of complicated policy that seems so emotionless, at the very bottom, it's all about values and beliefs and emotions and feelings, and that we build all of our policies upon. I'm gonna keep up with the text here. So when we look at social welfare sort of world, it's there are multiple sort of systems that make it up. And so this author breaks up social welfare systems into a few sort of pieces here. And if you want to flip to chapter 1, page 6, there's a figure at the very top that is sort of has these systems in progression, in order. And sort of how policy happens is you first have an issue, a social issue, something that's going wrong. For example, poverty. That's your social issue. Then you have this issue, and so you think to yourself, well, we've got to set some goals first to address this issue. How are we going to end poverty? So you set your goals, and then from your goals, you build out a legislation, a policy, some sort of regulation, and that's sort of your on paper attempt to put your goals into actions, and then those legislations, those regulations then become programs, welfare programs. And so that's sort of the social welfare systems put together. So and sort of in that context, that process that I just described brings up a lot of questions. And so here are just some of them. And please read this text. It really is great to just get you thinking about all of the complicated things that go into trying to solve a social issue. Who gets the services? Are services just free for anybody to pick up? Poverty, if poverty is your problem, can the rich get the same services that the poor can get? How are you eligible? So each question here has a term across from it, as you can see. Why do you get the services that you get? That relates to the program goals. What do you receive? These are called benefits. How do you receive? How do they receive the services? Well, there has to be a system in place, a service delivery system. What does it cost? We got to analyze the costs. There's always a voice for all of these policies and programs saying, who's going to pay for this? So great questions to ask. And now let's sort of talk another foundational piece, the purpose of a social welfare system. How do we get here? Why are we doing this? Well, one foundational answer to that is the idea of a safety net, to provide a safety net of emergency services, so that when one person in a society gets hit with something unexpected, that this won't lead to their just extreme poverty or death. And there are so many of us that, to provide services effectively for an individual in a society like this, you know, one balanced person can't do that. And so we have to really create a policy, create a system that can help many individuals. So the next sort of breakdown that the text talks about is in policy development. So there's a concept of residual policy development happens in sort of a residual manner. Basically, this is a reactionary. So there's a call for an organized public intervention when the normal situation breaks down. When a family, when emergency crazy situation hits a family or the marketplace. We'll talk about the Great Depression in this text. It's a really important moment in American history where the marketplace just broke, and there was an overnight poverty that we had to react to, sort of a residual approach. This is the idea that social services are required when a problem cannot be addressed by the individual. Sort of a competing thought in policy development is this idea of institutional. So this is social welfare programs that are seen as a normal part of the social structure. I think almost across the board, people would say, whether you're conservative or liberal, something like public school is a social welfare program that should be institutional. This shouldn't be reactionary. This should be a part of the fabric of our lives. Institutional social welfare policies, some of them are just seen as a legitimate function of society. When we're talking about provision of services, sort of a similar breakdown is the concept of universality. So one side of the debate says that social services should provide benefits to all members of the society, regardless of their income and means. We should have, like, there's certainly a loud and growing population of people that are saying healthcare should be universal. There shouldn't be someone in this society that has to go without. And then the other side says, well, who's going to pay for it? So which brings another approach to provision of services, that we should be selective. Selectivity is the other point. Services are restricted to those who can demonstrate a need. You have to be eligible or deserving. That sort of concept. So what I would say as I read this, and man, as I read it, it sends me into knots. How do we make all these things come together? So I can see a lot of points in a more conservative outlook on policy. I can see a more liberal viewpoint. What I think in the text points out is that pretty much how we end up, how this ends up playing out is really a blend. What happens is we get together, our politicians get together, they argue, and then if they come to an agreement, it is usually some sort of a blend that blends residual with institutional, universal with selective. So an example of a universal thing is FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Act. We have a policy in place that is provided universally in emergency moments. And then more selective, we have some selective policies. These are cash assistance, that's TANF, food stamps, Medicaid. You have to qualify for that. They're not just giving that to everybody. Let's see. And then sort of under the institutional sort of category of welfare, there are some universal things like public education. We talked about that earlier. Fire and police protection. These are things that pretty much we've agreed upon. This should be a part of universal institutional life for us. But some of those other institutional things would include that are selective, or some things like Social Security and Medicare. All right, now we're getting to the undergirding this idea of values and beliefs. What's underneath all of this? And the text breaks it into two terms: values and beliefs. It's a little bit confusing, but let's just spell this out. Their definition is: a value is the worth, desirability, or usefulness placed on something. So you have your value, and then you combine that with a belief, which is an opinion or a conviction. So both have shifting impact on social welfare policy. Okay, so an example of this is religious value. Development of social welfare services can be traced. I mean, when we go back into the history of all this, which we will in a future chapter, we see that a lot of this traces back to religious values. That before social welfare was a thing, it started from its beginnings. Really, a lot of them were religious values that came out churches and believers in a lot of Christian social welfare services started, and that really kicked all of this off. So then there are personal values, maybe less religious, that just reflects our own beliefs. These can vary. I mean, a lot of times in a religious value, there's a guide outside the person that sort of keeps everybody sort of moving in the same direction. A personal value really can vary person to person. Your story, your background, your family can change that personal value. And then we have social values. Example of two social values that compete in this realm is the idea of social responsibility and citizenship. Some people say we have a collective responsibility to do this, and this. And the other side says, no, I am a citizen, you're a citizen, you get to do what you want to do. Your decisions may lead disaster to you, but that doesn't have anything to do with me. The other values listed here: hard work and self-sufficiency. So yeah. So the chapter ends here with a long list of competing beliefs that will just fight each other, from what we see from the very beginning of sort of institutional social welfare policy in our country, and all the way to the present day. The idea of, first of all, undeserving and deserving people. That is a that'll have you doing mental gymnastics. Do we say that somebody deserves this service, or these people don't? A lot of times, like in the early days, it was widows, orphans, disabled. These are classically considered deserving poor. And then alcoholics or able-bodied, poor, or sometimes people with mental disabilities, haven't always been seen as deserving in our history and even today. These ideas of individual responsibility, social responsibility, individual change, social change, self-sufficiency, social support. These are all pretty similar, but competing beliefs. We hear a lot of the term entitlement when you listen to the news, depending on which news show you watch. Entitlement, handouts. And then I love that they talk about this in the text, just sort of how we typically do things. We like to help people that we know. That it's easier to help someone we know than to help a stranger. So these things compete as we construct these things. Here's some more competing beliefs. So I hope that this book, this chapter, this course, I hope that it really doesn't necessarily teach you a bunch of things so you can be somebody that knows about policy. Really, what I hope it'll do is get you thinking about the complicated nature of policy, of social welfare. It's a great thing. It's a great thing to examine all the sides of a debate, of a thing. So here are just some things to consider, some bullet points here that this chapter sort of has brought up. U.S. beliefs that we all have freedom of choice. Do we all really have freedom to choose how we live our lives? How does that create social injustice potentially? How do social welfare policies and programs assist in providing choices? So I will give a discussion question for the week based on this chapter. In fact, it'll be kind of a 2-for-1. This will be written down, but the questions will be: how would you describe what our social welfare system is to a friend who is not taking this course? And then why do you think it's important to study social welfare policy? That answer may not be super clear to you right now, but that's okay. What I really want is a thoughtful response that shows that you're engaging with a topic, even if it's a little unfamiliar to you. So welcome to the course, welcome to week 1, and we'll talk to you soon.